Dr Einat Wilf, thank you so much for joining us here on AIJAC Insight and welcome to Australia.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Now, I want to start with looking back over your career and what a career it's been so far. Over the past 30 years, intelligence officer in the IDF, you studied a BA in government finance at Harvard, you've studied in France, an MBA, you've done political science PhD at Cambridge. And then in your actual political career, you've worked with Vice Prime Minister Shimon Peres as foreign policy advisor, member of the Knesset for 3 years for the Labour Party and then the Independent Party. And now you've registered a new party.
Yes.
Zeal for Equality and Service. So we'll come back to that because I want to know more about that. And in between, you've authored, just casually 8 books or so. When we pause to reflect on this trajectory, first of all, I want to ask you why politics for you personally?
It's not politics per se. I can say that from a fairly early age, as a teenager, it's not something that I can explain, but I was fascinated by anything and everything that stood at the intersection of Israel, the Jewish people, and the world at large. Abba Ibn was my hero as a teenager. I would read his books. Netanyahu was Israel's ambassador to the United Nations when I was a teenager. And again, I was fascinated by this, the ability to tell Israel's story on the international stage. And I can say pretty much at that age, I was already dead set on doing that, anything that had to do with that intersection.
You came up through the Labour movement. When you look back at the evolution of your ideas, how do you look back on that? How do you reflect on that and your political identity in the evolution?
So the Labour Party itself also went through a lot of changes, and in many ways one could argue that where I am now is where the Labour Party was at the time of Israel's founding. But my evolution is very much the evolution of what today people call lived experience. I had ideas, which were the ideas of the Labour Party, the Israeli left, when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, this notion of land for peace, that Israel can finally have peace with its Arab neighbors, with the Palestinians, and that the path towards that peace was based on Israel handing over land. So we had that idea, and then comes the part that I say people kind of like to forget or erase. We tried it. Israel literally tried to hand over land in order to make peace, especially with the Palestinians, to find out that this was not what was going on. So my personal evolution actually comes, and I think this is typical of everyone. You evolve when your ideas and reality clash, and you're trying to therefore explain, okay, what other ideas therefore can explain reality? And I realized that the ideas that can explain that reality is that it's not about land. It's not that what stands between us and peace is a Palestinian state or Palestinian control of land. And through meeting them and researching, I realized that Palestinians have always told us they're not interested in land per se. They're interested in the Jews not being sovereign in the land, what they call from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. I will say, if you ever wonder free of what, in Arabic, they make it very clear, from water to water. Palestine will be Arab exclusively, no Jewish sovereignty. So basically, my evolution is the evolution of having, sometimes I describe it as a hypothesis. What stands between us and peace is Palestinian statehood, Palestinian control of territory, living through the failure of that hypothesis, and ultimately realizing that Palestinians, to their credit, have always told us what they wanted, we just didn't listen, or when we listened, it sounded so preposterous. Like they can't seriously, like their position cannot seriously be that there will not be a Jewish state. Like that cannot be their position. So we just assume that it's anywhere between bluster to just a maximalist negotiating position, that they will compromise in due course, only to realize that no, they were very serious. It's their position, and to their credit, for a century they've been very consistent about both their words and their actions.
Yeah, very honest from the inception.
Exactly.
When you look at that personal evolution
Yes.
within, do you see any sort of mirroring with Israeli society in general?
Broadly speaking, yes, because again, we've all lived through this. So the number of Israelis today who believe that the only reason we don't have peace is because Israel didn't try hard enough, by now they're very few, because they have a very, very hard case to make. Because you need to show that the other side really supports that claim. And you don't have it. You actually do not have Palestinian leaders or organizations that say, yes, if only Israel had offered a little bit here or a little bit that, then that would have brought us to peace. Whenever those Israelis who still believe that, they believe that out of their own wishful thinking, but they're not able to bring evidence on the other side that this is really the issue. It's just us very much hoping to believe in it. So yes, all Israelis live through the kind of this euphoria of the 90s, certainly for Israelis who were the left, the belief in a new Middle East and peace now, and then to see it completely collapse, to see Arafat in 2000, to see Abu Mazen in 2008 as two Palestinian leaders walk away from clear, concrete opportunities to have a state. But not only that, to have it be followed up with violence. And most important, to see that there are no voices in Palestinian society who are dissenting, who are saying, no, we should have said yes. Sometimes people get very angry that I go through history. I sometimes say that the Jewish curse is that we are a historical people with a deep sense of history at an ahistorical time. Well, people just don't care. They're like, now, we don't care how this happened over the years. People like, end the occupation. I'll be like, but why is Israel's military in the West Bank and before 2005 in Gaza? Why? People are like, we don't care. I'm like, okay, we kind of need to understand why it's not brought to an end.
The cause and effect.
Yes, because every time Palestinians could have had a state that would end Israel's military presence in the West Bank and Gaza, they didn't want it. But we're a historical people at an ahistorical age, and sometimes people get very annoyed when I keep bringing about the history. I keep bringing up the quote I often use by Ernst Bevin from February 47 about the Jews wanting a state and the Arabs wanting the Jews not to have a state. And people are like, oh, that was then. I'll talk about 2000, 2008. I'll bring it to more recent history. They'll be like, that was then. I was like, you know what? Now, in 2025, Olmert, the Israeli prime minister who negotiated with the boss, he published the map because people said, oh, the reason there was no agreement is because there was no map. So he was like, there's a map, here's the map. So that was recently, a few weeks or months ago. And even now, in 2025, there was only one lone Palestinian voice. He is one of 4 Palestinian individuals who really speak courageously against the ethos of from the river to the sea, return, resistance. Only him said, that was a good offer. We should have said yes. But that was it. So even in the present, you don't have Palestinian voices, organizations, a society engaged in internal debate saying, why didn't we say yes? So at one point, you have to appreciate the consistency and just accept it for what it is.
I want to come back to that point, but before we go into that further, I want to talk about identity. And you proudly identify as a Zionist and as a feminist.
Yes.
We have seen this phenomenon in recent years of Western progressives and wokeism hijacking and appropriating terms, redefining them, creating another narrative and calling that truth.
Yeah.
I want to know from you, what does it personally mean to be a Zionist and a feminist?
Certainly. The reason that I've become very clear about those identities, my Twitter profile says feminist, Zionist, atheist. Yes. And what I've realized over the years, and why I insist on it, is that in different contexts and in different groups, each of these identities and titles and kind of labels, a lot of people are like, it's okay to believe in those things, but don't use the name. You know, the name, the label is a bit strong. And my answer would be actually precisely because the label grates on people's, I insist on it because it's precisely the confidence of projecting, of standing behind that labels that I insist on, because what they're trying to get us to do is to be less confident about those labels. There's a phrase, I think by Gloria Steinem, that people oppose feminism either because they don't know what it means or because they do know what it means. I think the same could be said about Zionism, that people oppose it because they don't know what it means or because they do know what it means, that it means confident, liberated, authentic Jews, and that's something that they don't want to exist in the public sphere. But on a more personal note, the reason that I've come to really appreciate those labels and identities and revolutions is I would not exist without them. As part of the ahistorical tendency of our age, we tend to assume that all the rights that we enjoy just somehow are normal, obvious, of course. But again, when you learn a little bit of history, you realize that nothing about it is obvious. The fact that Jews can live as free and confident and liberated, how recent that is, how much, sacrifices were to make that happen. For women to be able to have our own salary, our own education, make decisions about who we marry, how many children we have, things that we take so for granted that we don't realize how much kind of fighting and effort and sacrifice went to each one of those achievements. So for me to carry those labels proudly is a kind of way of saying thank you.
Just further on feminism, I know so many, not just women, Jewish women, were horrified after October 7 to see the silence from so many Western organisations. The UN took 150 days alone to verify the brutalisation and the mass rape of Jewish women on October 7. How did that play out for you?
So I have to say that in that aspect, there was nothing special or unique. People highlighted a sense of hypocrisy, but that was not unique to that. I often highlight, I've been following it for at least 20 years, this equation of Israel, Zionism, and the Star of David with everything that is evil in our world, imperialism, colonialism, apartheid, racism, and then ethnic cleansing and genocide and Nazism. And all of this is about creating the notion that Israel, Zionism, the collective Jew, the confident Jew, is somehow associated with the worst evils, pure evil. Now, if you are led to believe that, then then the logical step is that evil must be eradicated. And you have zero sympathy for evil. Evil must be eradicated by any means necessary. I always mention the placard after October 7th of Keep the World Clean. So it doesn't matter, women, children, families, hostages, no one's going to get sympathy because they are all part of the collective evil which needs to be eradicated. And I think people were shocked, and they were shocked because every time they were shocked by every measure, that the hostage posters are getting torn down, that people don't want to watch the video of the atrocities that were committed on October 7th, and even denying it, even though Hamas very gleefully filmed them and streamed them in live. So, and about the women and what happened, people, it's all part of the same thing, which is, since Israel, Zionism, Star of David is evil, then whatever happened to them, they had it coming, and no empathy is due.
I want to talk about your book, 2020 book, The War of Return. You co-authored it with researcher Adi Schwartz. And some of the key ideas, and it really centres around this notion that the Palestinian right of return isn't about refugees, it's about the erasure of Israel. That's to sum it up. And you mentioned before about the quote from Ernest Bevin, the British Foreign Secretary, who made that essential point of principle is that the Arabs will not accept any sort of Jewish take on the land, essentially. A few of the other key points that you made was that UNRWA essentially perpetuates the problem, and that many potentially well-meaning Western liberal democracies also add to that as well by putting more and more money. And essentially it comes to the point that a real peace requires ending this dream. Now we're post-October 7. And it's been made very clear that this is not about two states. It's not about land. We saw, as you mentioned before, the jubilation and the barbarity of October 7. And the realisation of from the river to the sea. Where to from here in eradicating that term, as you call it, Palestinianism? And if you want to talk a little bit to that, to find real peace, is it possible?
So when the book came out, it came out first in Hebrew in 2018 and then in English in 2020. And it really emerged from both Adi and mine's personal journey. We both come from the left. Adi was an editor in Haaretz, the left-leaning newspaper in Israel. And we both had we've lived through the same experiences. And the book was this joint effort to highlight that on the other side, the Palestinians take seriously all the ideas that we thought were merely negotiating chips, return, perpetual refugeehood, and that what they do want is a state. And we talk about the realization that it's not what they want. And what they want is that the Jews will not have a state, that's their top priority, and that's the Bevin quote. Over the years, the number one comment we received on the book was that if you're going to read one book that explains the essence of the conflict, this is it. So now that we've published in Israel an updated version of the book to post-October 7th, and it's still just in Hebrew and we're working on English, we leaned in much more into that, into the fact that the story of the refugeehood return is really about the essence of the conflict. Those are just symptoms of the complete, utter, consistent Arab, but especially Palestinian refusal to accept Jewish sovereignty in any size, whatever borders, anywhere in the Jewish homeland, anywhere between the river and the sea. So in the new book, we really gave it a name. We call that ideology Palestinianism. We say that Palestinianism has 4 core tenets: from the river to the sea, there will be no Jewish state, And we, the Palestinians, are therefore perpetual refugees until return. And we explain that return is synonymous with no Jewish state. It's not some innocent idea. And that October 7th was the realization of the Palestinian dream vision of return, which was always imagined as this violent invasion and triumph. So what we explain, once it becomes very clear that this is an ideology that has tragically become the identity of a people, is that the only path to peace is not about this or that institutional arrangement or land partition. The reason that all these efforts failed is that they never addressed the core issue. And the core issue is the blanket, consistent Arab and especially Palestinian rejection of Jewish sovereignty. So our argument is that, quite simple, if you really want to have peace where the Jewish state gets to live, because there's definitely those whose vision of peace and utopia is keep the world clean, right? Eradicate Jewish sovereignty. But if you're a normal person, you understand that the humane vision of peace is that there's a Jewish state in whatever size, and that the Arab world finally lets go of this insane obsession with the non-existence of a Jewish state. We explain that Palestinianism as an ideology has to die so that Jews and Arabs can finally live and come to reasonable political solutions, which become possible when your top priority is no longer to destroy the other. Now, I'm working on a small book now in Hebrew that will have the lovely title of Peace Not Now. And the argument is that we have tried shortcuts for too long. Wait for another Palestinian leader. If it's not direct negotiations, let's just get out of the territory, as we did in Gaza. Just a bunch of shortcuts. And all of them were designed to avoid dealing with the molten lava, which is at the core of the conflict. So my argument in this book, but it's also in the updated of the War of Return, is that there's no shortcuts. The path to peace is about pushing Palestinianism to the margins so that it's no longer a legitimate ideology, that it's no longer the identity of a people. And here perhaps it's important to say, sometimes people say, Palestinianism is merely Islam. And here I think it's important to say, Islam, Christianity, they clearly have a fraught relationship with the idea of Jewish power, Jewish sovereignty, but they are systems that have a lot to say beyond the Jews. Christianity and Islam are not just about the Jews. They're broader systems. As a result, you could have had, beginning in the 17th century, Christian Zionism. We're seeing now Arab and Muslim countries that are letting go of anti-Zionism and are forging an Arab and Muslim identity that is not obsessed with the destruction of Israel. So an Arab and Muslim identity can be broader. Palestinianism is only about the destruction of the Jewish state. There's no constructive element. There's no constructive element that says, okay, we actually want something positive. It is all about wanting the Jews to have nothing, the Jews to have zero. And in that sense, Palestinianism, because it's so focused and obsessed, not on building something, but on destroying what the Jews have built, it has taken the worst of Arab and Islamic view of the Jews. It has taken the worst of Nazi propaganda. There's a lot of research that if you look at the Hamas charter, it's about 50% Muslim Brotherhood, 50% Nazi propaganda. It has absorbed into it the Soviet invention of anti-Zionism as a respectable replacement for the discredited anti-Semitism of World War II for obvious reasons. Someone recently wrote a great piece, Hussein Abu Bakr Mansour, about Hamas being the children of Fanon, kind of this bloody post-colonial idea. So Palestinianism has absorbed into it just the worst of the Arab and Muslim world, the worst of the Western and Eastern Soviet world, and it all comes together in one place around the destruction of Jewish sovereignty.
It's like one ugly cocktail.
Yes.
The worst. Yeah.
Yes.
So then if that is, and it is, the foundation of an identity that has been built on over generations now,
Yes.
it's so deeply ingrained and embedded within individuals and within society, within Palestinian society, how do you overthrow that?
First, by making it clear that this is the goal. That is, we're not even there yet. We're not even there, and this is what I try to do in my writing and my speaking, to really get people to focus that the issue is this identity and ideology that is all about rejection. So step one is to even realize that this is the issue. That again, it's not about land, not about settlements, not about, it's like that all of these issues are not at the core. So first it's to really understand what's at the core. Once you understand that, then you can open the important struggle to bring that ideology to an end. And ideologies, people often ask, can you really kill or push ideologies to the margins? And I tell people, we do that all the time. This is what humans do. We defeat ideologies, we marginalize ideologies, we replace them with new ideas. So then people say, fine, but can you do it with violence? And I tell people, we also have a history of that. That's what we did with Nazi Germany. That's what we did with Imperial Japan. We made it clear, by the way, through violence, that their ideology is an ideology of destruction that will only ever bring ruin. And when they had to realize that there's a connection of cause and effect, that their choice to be Nazis, that their choice to have this imperial supremacist Japanese vision led them to ruin, then they were able to forge a new path that said, okay, we're leaving that behind. Palestinianism has to go through the same process to realize that the destruction and ruin in Gaza is the logical outcome of their choice, and it's a choice, over a century to devote themselves tragically, not to build for themselves, but to destroy others. If you have an ideology of destruction, it will only ever breed destruction. And if you do the first part well, making it clear that this ideology has to be defeated. If you do the second part well, mobilizing, that's why I've, removing the fuel of Palestinianism. That's why I've devoted so much of my time to UNRWA. UNRWA is fueling station number one of Palestinianism. Remove that fuel, remove that support. Then you can turn to countries in the Gulf and tell them, look, you are now doing something remarkable. You are now forging an Arab and Muslim identity that no longer has the need for the scapegoat of the Jews are to blame. You no longer need a scapegoat from your failures because you're no longer failing. To use the colorful language of the American president, I always say that anti-Zionism is the ideology of losers. It's the ideology of failed societies that need scapegoats, that need to blame someone. You're now having Arab and Muslim societies that are successful. They're forging a successful path for a modern Arab and Muslim identity. It's not a coincidence that those are the same societies that are letting go of anti-Zionism. They no longer need the conspiracies, the scapegoat, because again, they're not failing. So then we can turn to them, if we do step one and step two well, and tell them, look, can you help the Arabs of the West Bank of Gaza to no longer be Palestinianists, to forge a positive Arab identity that wants to build next to the Jewish state rather than instead of it? And the thing is this, I actually suspect that if we stop trying shortcuts and we finally have the kind of the patience to go the long route of defeating Palestinianism, I actually suspect that this will happen quicker than all the years that we tried shortcuts.
What about the role of Western countries who in many ways have enabled with a sense of moral superiority,
Yes.
right? And a historical lens.
Yes.
What role do they have to play in this as well?
So one of the kind of divisions I've created over the years, and really speaking to so many of the Western countries, because I'm now on record with my colleague Adi, books, lectures, essays, meeting with diplomats, journalists around the world, especially in European and Western capitals that have funded and are funding UNRWA, telling them long before October 7th, look at what you're funding. You're not funding some do-good humanitarian organization. Listen to what the Palestinians are telling you from their perspective, which is the only one that matters. They believe that you are funding their war against the Jewish state. So listen to them and realize that you are pumping money into something that will explode against us. I would tell them, look, you in Paris, Berlin, London, you're not going to pay the price of funding UNRWA. My people, we're going to be paying the price in blood. And we said that long before October 7th, because again, we did the one thing that I implore people to do, which is listen to what the Palestinians are actually saying about their goals. So in doing so over the years, I've come to create a division between doing good and feeling good. And what I realize is that most of the people, certainly in the West, who claim to want to do good, they only want to feel good. That's it. I mean, and by the way, this division is relevant for parenting, politics, anything. So a lot of people say they want to do good. They just want to feel good. You know, you give money to UNRWA, it has the letters UN in it. You're not interested in anything beyond it. You feel great about yourself. And I would tell them doing good will require you to do things that don't feel good at all. Doing good will require you to tell Palestinians that their entire worldview and identity is terrible, destructive, has to come to an end. That they need to, as the name of a book I've been using a lot about Japan post-World War II, they need to embrace defeat. They need to understand that given that their last century, all they did was initially to try to prevent and then to undo the existence of a Jewish state, that they lost. That this is over, that they need to come to terms with it. I remember when I once said that in the Norwegian parliament, long before October 7th. You know, the Norwegians are very attached to their vision of themselves as do-gooders in the world. And I told them, you're not doing good. You're funding war. And again, my people will pay for what you're funding. And I told them, you really want to do good? You really want to be true to your self-image as do-gooders? You need to tell the Palestinians that they lost, that it's over, that the most they can do is live next to a Jewish state, not on top of it, not from the river to the sea. You could imagine there was this stunned silence, but this is what we need the West to do. We need the West to remember that, again, we talked about ahistorical. People in the West don't realize that the last few decades of peace and prosperity and what was called the liberal world order was based on a West that was victorious, that went to war, that understood that it had to defeat ideologies like Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, that understood that those ideologies not only had to be defeated, they had to know that they lost. And that the way that you let people know that they lost is you take territory from them and you remove populations and you make them pay reparations so that they know that they were in the wrong. That is what the West needs to retrieve if we're ever going to get out of this current mess.
How do we cut through for Western leaders to actually make that realization? And if I can extend that out, there's been, as you're so well aware, such a torrent of misinformation, bias against Israel at best, blood libel against Israel, and by extension, the Jewish people worldwide. How do you cut through, not just with leaders, but with the people in the mainstream, that I think are the majority of people, for them to really understand and see that they have a role to play in this?
So the best means that I found of doing that is to let people know what the forest is rather than the trees.
Okay.
The trees were the individual libels, right? Racism, apartheid. We spent a lot of time trying to address each individual libel, writing books and essays and speakers and meetings and like, look, Israel's not apartheid, Israel's not racism. A colleague of mine, Dr. Shani Moore, wrote a beautiful piece called A Special Dictionary for Israel, showing how words that used to mean something like occupation or racism or apartheid were essentially deformed and removed of any sensible meaning in order to be able to apply it to Israel. We're seeing the same happen with genocide. That, again, since I've been around the block for a while, this word has been bubbling for at least 15 years. There has been a concerted effort to try to put it next to Israel for years. It has nothing to do with the current moment. So we spent a lot of effort trying to go after each individual libel. And what I've found to at least be more effective is to highlight the forest, which is this process of equating Israel, Zionism, and the Star of David with evil in order to create the vision that the world would be better off if we eradicated this evil. And what I tell people is that, first of all, they need to be aware that this is the most dangerous idea out there. The idea, not only that there is a utopia, but that what stands between this world and utopia is the collective Jew that needs to be eradicated by any means necessary. I know that you've been involved in promoting Holocaust education in Australia. In my experience, the greatest failure of Holocaust education is that people will, again, focus on the trees. They will know about Nazis, they will know about the death camps, about the atrocities. Very few people will be able to crystallize and understand that everything the Nazis did, they did because they believed in this idea of keep the world clean. They believed that they were birthing a utopia, that by getting rid of the collective Jew, literally one by one, they were birthing a better world. They believed in it. In many ways, you can commit those atrocities so systematically when you believe that you are birthing utopia. So I try to let people know that they are engaged with that. And on a more specific level, I let them know that every time in the last century, when anti-Zionism was allowed to reach an institutionalized, legislated, pitch kind of insanity level, ultimately the Jewish community was gone. And these days people tell me, how do we know if someone's an ally? And I tell them this. Do you think, or do you know, if they were made to understand that in repeating all these libels, playing with them, if they were made to know that they're playing with fire, that they are part of a playbook that only ever ended one way, no Jews are left, would they be horrified to know that this is what's going on? Or would they be kind of secretly pleased to know that this is where it leads? That's how we know who our allies are. And that's what I try to tell people. Let them know that what they're playing with only ever ends in one way. I've recently remarked, again, not generalizing, but for example, in the United States, if you look at many of the Jewish leaders who are fighting against the tide of rising anti-Zionism, this libelous equation of Israel and Zionism and the Star of David with all that is evil, they often, again, not exclusively, but they often come from families that were from the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, the Arab world, and Iran. And the reason is that in terms of, again, the history, they are only one, at most 2 generations removed from seeing how that playbook operated. Because whether it was the Soviet Union or Eastern Europe or the Arab world from Morocco to Afghanistan or Iran, they all said that they love Jews. They have nothing against Jews. And many times Jews were at the forefront of anti-Zionism. And it all ended up with the Jews gone. So the Jews who come from those backgrounds, their immediate history is much closer. And they know how this playbook operates. So they are at least less susceptible to falling into the trap of like, no, we love Jews. This is only about Israel, Zionism, you're the good kind.
What about those who are indifferent? The bystanders, so to speak, may not necessarily take an active interest or follow the news. And most people, particularly younger demographics these days, they get their news from TikTok or social media, and it's what the algorithm has served up, and it's just a headline and images, and the images are bad. Their perception is being formed even if they're not actively engaging, and it's very negative against Israel, and it's rather insidious. So is there an opportunity to address those people in the middle and somehow make them see that this is symptomatic of a bigger issue that Western civilization will face?
So there's no doubt that we're facing almost just a human difficulty. Humans in general, that's not unique, tend to not deal with issues if they're not directly impacted by them, and they tend to not deal with issues until the crisis is in their face.
Sure.
I mean, look, again, my personal experience before October 7th, I wrote about it, I spoke about it, and I got a lot of raised eyebrows of kind of, seriously, Einat, you're devoting your abilities, your time to UNRWA, this small organization. It's lovely. It has the letters U in it. The whole Palestinian issue is passé. Like, seriously, leave it. I thought I was dealing with something that was at the core, but it took an awful, awful tragedy for many people to say, oh, okay, now we want to listen. So first of all, this is human. Humans tend to not deal with issues unless they're directly impacted by them and until it hits them. But at least in my experience, we do have allies and people who see that there's no way that this ends well, that no society has ever emerged better on the other side of the insanity and obsession with getting rid of the collective Jew, believing that only eradicating the evil Jew stands between the present and utopia. No society has ever been the better for it. And there are people who see it. There are people who speak up. They are our allies. But you are right, and that definitely is why I haven't stopped talking, certainly feels that way, that the Jews suffer from a timing problem. By the time that many in the world wake up to the insanity, we have suffered the brunt of the damage. So can we avoid it this time? Can we get to a point where at least enough people rise up in societies like America, Canada, France, Britain, Australia, the 5 places where most Jews live outside of Israel, but ultimately also in the Arab world and the Middle East, will enough people rise up to say, enough, not here. This is not Australia. This is not what we want Australia to become. There's nothing good that waits us on the other side of this insanity. Will enough people rise in time? I don't know. I'm definitely trying my best to get as many allies as possible to see that. But also my message these days to Jews is we need to take care of ourselves and defend ourselves until the world wakes up, so that whatever damage they're trying to cause us, we will minimize its effect. But yes, there is a timing gap that we suffer from.
I mentioned in my first question about the new political party that you registered earlier this year, Zeal for Equality and Service.
I don't know why they translated it Zeal, but Oz. Yes, sorry.
Right. So what gap in the political map are you trying to fill? And what kind of voter are you hoping to reach?
So over the years, before October 7th, when I would speak about the issues that I speak about, for example, if you look at the title of the book, Peace Not Now, a lot of people emphasize the not now. I'm like, no, I'm also emphasizing the peace. I believe that it is incumbent on every Israeli leader to always have a vision of peace, even if it's long-term, even if it's about a deep transformation of the Arab world, almost a theological transformation to embrace Zionism rather than reject it. We need to have a vision for peace. I emphasize both elements. So over the years, as I would present my ideas, people would ask me, because on the one hand, my analysis could be considered very right-wing, all Palestinians, except for really a few courageous individuals, are engaged in Palestinianism and this rejection of the Jewish state. In that sense, there's no difference between Gaza and the West Bank, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. That's considered a very kind of right-wing analysis and view. But on the other hand, my insistence on peace, on the fact that we could find a political solution, would be considered very left-wing. So over the years, people would tell me, who has this vision? Who has these ideas in Israel? And my answer would be, it's either 5 people who by now have become my good friends and kind of colleagues, or this is the broadest Israeli consensus. And I think the idea of establishing a political party, and it really only emerged after October 7th, where again, I felt that a lot of the things I've been working on have, in the most terrible way, have become relevant, that more people are willing to listen, and also that our political class has failed us so badly that out of this tragedy, something new must come. The idea of establishing a new political party rather than kind of joining the existing ones is to try to test whether these ideas have broad appeal. And if no, then that's okay. If it turns out that no one wants to hear what I have to say, I'll go home, I'll write another book, that's fine. But if it has broad appeal, if I am able to cut across this right-wing, left-wing division, for Bibi, against Bibi, like if I'm able to cut through that and have ideas that appeal to like a broad Israeli segment, then at least it's worth a shot.
If you were to distill it into a few words, what do you think is key to reinstating that greater sense of unity in Israeli society that's currently missing?
So 2 of the 4 pillars that I'm going to be like running on and speaking on. One is really this idea of pursue peace based on a vision of what I've come to call Arab Zionism, which is the reverse of Palestinianism, just an Arab embrace of the Jewish right to self-determination in the land. So that would be one kind of key tenet. And the other is one that is more for Israeli society, is to align Israeli duties and Israeli rights. Certainly, what we've seen is that right now Israeli society is not aligned. We have quite a few groups who have essentially opted out of serving in the military, fighting for Israel's defense, and yet they get a lot of rights and payments from Israel, from the Israeli state. And the idea is to bring the idea of solidarity and to have a meaning. Solidarity means that you fight for your country, and therefore whatever your country gives you comes from that solidarity. It's not some abstract right that you just get to have if you're not really part of society and you're not willing to fight for it. So those would be the two key pillars. And we'll see if they tend to appeal to broad Israeli consensus or that they're just too limited.
I want to speak about your book, Shiva October. It's a clever play on Shiva, meaning 7, but also the mourning period that follows after death. 7th of October, in a nutshell, can you explain what your book addresses?
Yes. So here the idea of Shiva, the word in Hebrew means return. But again, like you said, it's a play on the kind of the hearing of Shiva, which means 7, or Shiva, like the mourning. And the idea is to claim, this is basically kind of updating of the War of Return, which basically says October 7th was carried out, the massacre was carried out in the name of the Palestinian vision of return, which is synonymous with the non-existence of the Jewish state. So the book really takes kind of the history that we wrote in the War of Return and updates it to October 7th to really connect between this vision, this ideology of Palestinianism and the massacre, and to basically make it clear, the massacre was not carried out by like some small group, Hamas, that hijacked Gaza, but rather Hamas was just the most brutal implementer of the Palestinist vision of no Jewish state, of return. And the book really makes it clear that this is the ideology and identity. And this is why you had so much euphoria in Gaza and the West Bank and among Palestinianists and their collaborators around the world. It was the euphoria of a people who have been groomed for decades to wait for that moment of return, which is synonymous with the brutal invasion and undoing of the Jewish state. And even now, when you see people turning against Hamas in Gaza, they're turning against Hamas because Hamas has failed. These are the same people who were euphoric when they believed that Hamas succeeded in implementing their vision. And now they're angry that Hamas is not successful. But if you notice, they're not turning away from the vision of Palestinianism. You're not yet hearing in those demonstrations people saying, our century-long war to undo the Jewish state was a terrible mistake, tragedy, and abuse of our people and resources. That you're not hearing yet.
I want to conclude our interview with just a few rapid-fire questions.
Sure.
Okay. A book, aside from yours, that every Zionist should read. Essential reading. Essential reading.
It's more about understanding the history of the Jewish people. I recommend The History of the Jews. It's a great kind of people who are non-Jews, but even Jews who want to really to understand the history of the people.
Why didn't we listen?
Again, very human. Unless it touches us directly and unless it's a crisis, we prefer to believe that all's good.
A moment since October 7 that changed you?
After October 7th, that changed me. I guess the biggest one, it wasn't a single moment, but it was the kind of the growing realization that the gap between the people of Israel and their government has reached an untenable position, that whereas the people of Israel, I would say, rose to the occasion. Our government has sunk through sheer incompetence to the occasion.
One thing Israel must do now to better ensure its future.
We need to ensure that this war ends with a clear victory and with Palestinianists understanding that they have been defeated. They need to not only be defeated, they need to know that. We can't allow this to be just another round of fighting where the other side goes back to saying, okay, we're going to try again. We can't allow that.
And just finally, hope, naive or necessary?
I would say in many ways both. If you look at the early Zionists, they also were, on the one hand, incredibly naive. But I think if they were not naive, for example, they believed that Arabs who were in the region would embrace Zionism because Zionism was a movement of people who came to build rather than to take. It was actually decolonial and anti-colonial movement. They were naive, but again, I think you needed that kind of naivete to marshal the power to go through such a remarkable project of building. So even if people blame me, for example, for being naive and the possibility of Arab Zionism, first of all, I say crazier things have happened. And I do believe that it is essential to us because as long as the Jews want to be sovereign, sovereignty is only in the land of Israel. And since the 7th century, the land of Israel is surrounded, the Arab and Islamic conquests were hugely successful. So the Jewish people are damned or destined, I try to emphasize destined, to remain a minute national, ethnic, religious, linguistic minority in an Arab and Islamic world. So the only vision of peace we can uphold is one of Arab Zionism. It might be crazy, it might be naive, but I believe it's the only vision worth upholding.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Einat Wilf.
Thank you.